Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Forgotten Hockey Players of Broadway, a nostalgic look back at our favorite Rangers from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. I'm Tom Browning, along with my co-host Rob Berger. We can be heard on Google Play, iHeartRadio, YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, and of course, our website at gotommyboyproductions.libsyn.com. That's gotommyboyproductions.libsyn.com. Please check it out. You can capture all of our episodes on our webpage. You can contact us by just clicking on the contact bar. You can leave a message. We'd love to hear from you. Love to hear about the players that you would like for us to profile. Love to hear about maybe some of the seasons other than the 60s, 70s, and 80s that really made an impact on you as a fan. Again, we will be going off the menu every once in a while. We'll be talking about the current day New York Rangers, the state of the franchise, and again, we love to talk about previous playoff games, impactful trades that took place in New York Rangers history. So wherever you listen to us, please hit subscribe. It's free. So without further ado, here are your hosts, Tom Browning and Rob Berger. Thanks for tuning in. Welcome to another episode of the Forgotten Hockey Players of Broadway. I'm Tom Browning with my host, Rob Berger, and my son, Mike Browning. Guys, hope you're doing well. What's going on? Happy Thanksgiving in advance.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Hard to believe. Here we are, days away from Thanksgiving, and there's no National Hockey League. How weird is that?
It's a different
I don't
year.
know if weird is the right word. Sad. I think sad's a more appropriate word.
Well, that too. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, depressing.
That's true. And if they're going to start the camps on time, they better make some hay and get this thing with the National Hockey League Players Association squared away, because technically we're looking at mid-December, which is only, 18, 19 days away. And the teams that were not in the play-in series, they get an extra week to 10 days of camp, which means they would have to start, the end of the first week in December, right?
Yeah, I don't think it's happening.
Yeah, there's no shot. It doesn't seem like there's any light at the end of the tunnel right now in terms of the virus subsiding. So I wouldn't be surprised if they end up waiting longer than they were hoping for.
So we're looking at maybe February 1st as opposed to January 1st.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think the January 1st, just that even being a topic of discussion was because of the NBA. I don't think the NHL really ever had, obviously I just based that on my gut, nothing factual. I don't think they had an intention of moving it up to January 1st at all.
Yeah, that's probably true. It's probably just maybe a negotiating ploy, or like you said, just to get their name out there in the news. Another big decision they have to make. Are they going to have those pod cities, those 4 or 5 cities spread throughout the United States and Canada for teams to play in, or are they going to have each team have home games without fans? I guess that's another major decision they have to make. And, of course, they're also looking at maybe setting up a Canadian division as well. Real quick, what do you think's going to happen on that front? Rob, we'll start with you.
Oh, I have zero idea. I'm just glad I don't have hard decisions like that in my life, because it's, I like the idea of having a Canadian division, maybe having, if you don't bubble, maybe having extended road trips. I don't think having too many bubbles is financially sustainable for the league right now. I don't think any owner is going to, or maybe not any, but the majority of owners are going to sign off on empty buildings. I really don't. I think they're going to want 5,000 people in the stands at their games.
Wow, that's tough. Especially now we're getting into the cold winter, the cold days where, everyone's very concerned about COVID increasing intensity with people inside and colder weather. Boy, you're right. You'd hate to be making that decision. Mike, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, no one's, at this point, with the numbers being what they are, no one's going to sign off on indoor arenas having fans there. And, like Rob was saying, the owners aren't going to sign off on empty buildings, and the Players Association isn't going to sign off on bubble cities again. there was already that piece that came out, I think, in ESPN that talked about, honestly, how miserable the bubbles were for the players. So that's going to be an impossible sell to do again, especially for an even longer period than they had last time.
Yeah.
So I honestly don't know what they're going to do. I think the Canadian division will happen just because of the difficulty of crossing the border these days and all the red tape that goes into that. But aside from that, I mean, the only thing that I could think of is just some kind of, compromise where, I don't know, maybe they do allow some amount of fans in and, the players just travel. Like Rob was saying, maybe they do extended road trips. I mean, the NFL does it. The NFL has kept COVID relatively under control, and hockey teams are much smaller than football teams. So maybe they try to go the NFL route, but a lot of difficult decisions and not easy.
I like the idea of having 3-game homestands, though. I think that would really bring greater intensity to already established rivalries, but could also start developing newer rivalries when you have 2 and 3 game series setting up. But can you imagine in a tough physical sport like hockey, by the second or third game, you're kind of almost looking like a mini playoffs where guys are getting really under their skin. They've had enough of each other. There's a lot of physicality. I think that could make for very interesting, entertaining games. What do you think?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
I mean, it did. I think it did in every sport, or did in baseball at least. Getting these guys together closer and closer. And again, the best way to do this is these prolonged homestands. It's the only way that they're going to be able to do it.
Yeah, it should be interesting. Well, we'll wrap up the show with a little update on, if we have time, on maybe some of the goings-ons with the Rangers, personnel matters, maybe expand on some of this other stuff. But I'd like to discuss our featured player, and that is number 15, Jim Neilson, who recently passed away. I believe he passed away earlier in November. And again, a guy that we shake our head when we look at players that we probably really should have profiled Neilson a long time ago. The great number 15. We're going to actually put the brakes on him just for a little bit, and then we'll get into Jimmy Neilson. But the guy I want to lead off with comes with great demand, actually. And a fan in particular, I'll give his first name, Dennis, who has been sending a lot of messages on YouTube after each of our shows have been posted. And he's a real fan of the show. He really likes what we do. He really feels that this is a missing element regarding the old-time Ranger players, the forgotten players of Broadway, how it's really filling an important niche. And Dennis, I thank you for your loyal viewership and listening to us. But there's one guy that he's been desperately trying for us to talk about, and that is Gratuni the Looney, Gilles Gratton, who was drafted in 1972 in the 5th round by the Buffalo Sabres, goaltender. And if memory serves me correctly, I don't believe he ever played a game with the Sabres because I think he didn't want to. He wound up playing for the St. Louis Blues for, I think, 4 games. He finished with a 2-0-2 record. He got tired of St. Louis, and he made up a lot of excuses why he didn't want to play games. And, one of the reasons why he didn't want to play is because he felt like he was, he wasn't feeling well, or he felt he had a certain injury. But more times than not, it was because the moon was not lined up correctly with Jupiter. And if the moon was not lined up correctly with Jupiter, he would not play. So this is the type of guy that he was. Wound up going back to the Toronto Toros of the WHA, where he actually played before he went with St. Louis. When he left Buffalo, he actually joined the WHA for a while and played with the Toronto Toros, where he had his best seasons. And then after he walked out on St. Louis, he went back to Toronto for a while. And then he decided, you know what, it's time that I go to New York. So the Rangers signed him as a free agent, and he backed up John Davidson during the 1976-77 season, and actually played in 41 games and had a record of, I believe it was 11-18. With the New York Press, number 33, that was the number he wore. And he was the first goalie that actually had artwork, really incredible artwork. I mean, really, quite amazing bit of artwork put on their face mask. Very professionally done, very elaborate. and he came out with the tiger mask, a very violent-looking tiger mask, teeth and all, roaring. And when the opposing players saw this, they were just oohing and ahhing, and that that got other goaltenders really interested in being creative and having some really elaborate designs set on their on the goalie mask. He believed in reincarnation, and he believed that he was a Spanish court during the Spanish Inquisition in one lifetime, and in another lifetime he felt that he was an executioner and that he used to stone people to death. As penance for living these previous lives, he was rewarded by playing goalie in the National Hockey League, where we have to face hard rubber pucks going 95, 100 miles an hour. So this guy, Gilles Gratton was really something else. Grattuni the Loony was his nickname. And, he also believed that he could play classic piano without ever playing the instrument before. So this was a guy that was very, very interesting, to say the least. And there's a lot of funny stories that John Davidson will talk about. And I believe Paul Henderson, the great former Toronto Maple Leaf player, you can catch on YouTube. So Dennis, didn't want you to think that we're totally ignoring you. I just wanted to touch on number 33. He played 1 year with the Rangers. Yeah, and that's the career of Gilles Gratton in a nutshell. So,
well, actually, I was going to say, I wonder if the goalie from Slapshot, Denis Lemieux, is based on him. The kind of the quirky Quebecois guy.
Yeah, could be. I mean, Mike, that's an excellent point.
Yeah, and it also kind of became a little bit of a trope or a stereotype in hockey movies, where you kind of have the quirky goalie, and I wonder if that started there. And I don't know if you guys remember, but the Winter Classic, I forget which year it was. I think when they played the Flyers, and obviously Martin Biron wasn't starting, so you didn't see it too much. But he had a mask that paid homage to Gratton's tiger mask.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
So, Mike, you had heard of Gratton before today?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
I knew him because of his mask.
Gotcha. Oh, yeah.
That's
really why anyone really remembers him. I mean,
yeah.
if you go on Google or any search engine and you pull up the name Gilles Gratton, it's amazing how much stuff is out there on a guy that played basically one solid year in the National Hockey League.
Well, I mean, I think everything else that you put forth about the guy kind of explains why he's has such a big presence on the internet. Kind of a weird guy.
Very weird. Very weird. Very acrobatic goalie too. He was very acrobatic as a goaltender. Some people feel that he really didn't love the game. He really didn't, because he always made excuses why he couldn't play. But when he played, he was half decent. So
well, he thought it was a punishment.
Yeah.
Yeah. He really thought that.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of sleepless nights as an executioner, stoning people to death. So I guess, crazy stuff. Crazy stuff. Rob, any closing thoughts on Gilles Gratton?
Yeah, listen, I mean, he's not far off. Putting your body in front of the frozen pucks. I mean, yeah, it can't be seen as punishment. Why else would you want? You always joke about goalies being a little crazy, right? So I guess he's just the embodiment of that.
Yeah, it's he's just a very interesting guy. And again, I was in college when he played. And, I had a vague recollection of him, and the mask, and but, he spelled Davidson for half a season. Yeah, it's goaltenders, I think, are kind of like lefty pitchers. Lefty pitchers always had this reputation as being a little bit flaky in baseball, and I guess goaltenders kind of the same way. I think there's been a lot of quirky goaltenders in the National Hockey League.
Absolutely.
So, all right. So let's get into number 15, Jim Neilson. Very interesting story. I don't know, Rob, if you want to kick it off, or Mike, if you want to kick it off for a change today. Again, one of my favorite players, a former Norris Trophy candidate player. That's how good he was. That's how great he was. And again, I think we all know now, after delving into his past, which I never knew about until this podcast, did some research. I had no idea that he grew up in an orphanage with he and his two sisters. An indigenous First Nation player from Saskatchewan, obviously. But Rob, Mike, why don't you start off, and I'll kind of fill in the gaps with some of my memories and stuff like that. Rob, you want to take it first, or Mike?
All I was going to say was, I mean, the guy, I think he, like you were saying, that's the thing that jumps out at you. And he recently passed away, and there was a push, kind of a campaign to get him into the Hockey Hall of Fame. And obviously the focus was on his upbringing and his heritage. It's funny because he has a very stereotypical hockey name because Neilson, because his father was Danish.
Yeah.
But yeah, he grew up in an orphanage from the kind of Big River First Nation. And I think I forget if you said this was the impetus for this episode, but one of the Rangers first rounders of this last draft, Braden Schneider, said he was his favorite player. They were both from Saskatchewan, I think Big River, or no, Prince Albert. So which is right there. I think that's why, and that kind of brought him back into the kind of the public conscious for Ranger fans, and we began to ask ourselves, hey, this guy is a Hall of Fame candidate, a perennial Norris Trophy candidate. A long tenured Ranger, was an assistant captain, one of the best defensemen in league history. He made one of the 100 greatest Rangers of all time list, but half of us have never heard of him.
Yeah.
And here we have obviously, unfortunately, recently he passed away, which is another reason why we're talking about him now. But we have this draft pick who says he was his favorite Ranger, and a lot of people were just like, huh, who? And you delve into it, and not only does he have one of the most interesting stories of any Ranger, but he was one of the best players in Rangers history, and which is kind of just completely forgotten.
Yeah, he finished number 30. Some reports are he's number 30 in the top 100 Rangers. Another one had number 42. That's right, Mike. And guys, people have to read the article on was it Blue Shirt Banter, I believe, right, Mike? That's the article you're referring to that I mentioned before the show started by Kevin Power.
Yeah, that was a great article. You referred that to us. And I think that kind of touches on what we're talking about with the fact that he is, don't want to say disrespected, but doesn't get the respect and recognition he deserves as what the caliber of player that he was.
Yeah, that's right. As we've been saying recently in some of the more recent podcasts, and Kevin Power does a great job talking about this. The Rangers are a team, original six franchise that really focuses on their proud tradition. They just do a lousy job, to put it more cleanly and nicely, a lousy job in educating their fans, especially the younger fans who maybe picked up on the Rangers' history from the 1990s to present. Just a pitiful job, really, on educating fans on their history, their 90-plus years of Ranger hockey, and a player of the magnitude of a Jim Neilson, even a Brad Park, which Kevin Powers talks about in the article. So few Ranger fans have any appreciation or even know who these guys are. So they have a lot of work to do on really educating. I mean, you look at the other five teams, whether it be Chicago, Detroit, Boston, Montreal, Toronto, they worship their history. They really worship their players from back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. They really do. They keep them front and center. And the Rangers just don't do that. They have a very flying by the seat of their pants, ad hoc approach to honoring the previous generation of players. Rob, what are your thoughts on what you saw with Jimmy Neilson here?
Yeah, I'm just going to piggyback on what you're saying. For a second, I was worried this podcast was going to get an explicit warning when you started talking about how the Rangers treat their history. I was a little worried.
No, I showed restraint.
I don't know how many bad, how many bad words were allowed before we get that E tag. But yeah, I mean, Nielsen's the really why we do this podcast, right?
Yep.
Less than 350 guys have played 1,000 games in the NHL, and he's one of them, which is remarkable. And starting first with talking about teams and their history, and just look at local markets here in New York: Yankees, Mets, and Islanders. They spend so much time, whether it be in their buildings or on their broadcast, talking about old teams. And how a guy like this gets ignored, pardon me, is beyond me. He had such a superb career, and I love bringing up the stats. And one of my favorite stats is from Hockey Reference. It's point shares, which talks about how much an individual player contributed to a team's overall points. And he had a 5-year stretch where he was either leading the team in point shares or top 3, in the heart of his career. And that's while skating with Brad Park. And he wasn't counted on for offense. He was just that solid. I mean, he was a defenseman's defenseman, which maybe that's why maybe if he scored more goals, we'd talk about him more. But just overall, I mean, the epitome of a great stay-at-home defensive defenseman. Even though we did bring, we did have obviously I didn't see him live, but a great shot and was able to contribute. He was the core of that defense to let Brad and allowed Brad Park to do his thing for a good solid amount of years there.
That's true, Rob. He really was. He came up. He was actually signed back in 1958 by the Rangers Scouts. This was before the draft. He started in the 62-63 season. So the Rangers, he was signed in 58. So the Rangers, the Scouts, the Bird Dogs out there, they saw him when he was 15 years old. And that's what they did back in those days before the draft, right? Before they signed these kids at an incredibly young age. And he was playing his hockey basically after school in the orphanage, And he said that the orphanage taught him so much. The nuns, in particular, he showed a lot of leadership for, I guess, the younger kids in the orphanage. I guess there was one nun in particular who was a big Detroit Red Wing fan who used to feed him extra meals, I guess, knowing that he worked so hard, demonstrating leadership and responsibility at the orphanage, that she would, slip him some extra sandwiches. And I guess food was not plentiful there. It was a privately run orphanage, and there wasn't a lot of government help. And all he did was basically he did his work at the orphanage and went to class and went to church every day. The nuns made sure of that. And he played his hockey, and he played a lot of hockey, a lot of games of, I guess it's shimmy or shinny. That's a Canadian sport, I guess, that's similar to hockey, and which really perfected his passing skills and his skating skills. He was a very good skater and a big, strong guy. He wasn't the most physical, though. I mean, he was known for his hip checks. He was known for clearing out the crease in front of Jockerman and Gump Worsley and the goaltenders of that time. But he was not a fighter, and he was a real gentleman. I guess he was taught in the orphanage, you have integrity and you play hard, you work hard. But again, typical of the Rangers back then, who had tough players, but they did not involve, a lot of fighting. That was the type of player he was. And initially, he came up in 62, 63. This was before Brad Park. But he only played with Park for a little bit. It was Emil Francis set up a rotation of Park and Dale Rolfe, and then Jimmy Neilson and Rod Sealing were the top 4. And then you had Arnie Brown was in there. You had Tim Horton, the great Tim Horton, was the 5th and 6th defenseman for the Rangers during the mid to late 60s, early 70s. This was a guy finished twice in the top 5 Norse voting for the top defenseman. He finished second behind Bobby Orr, I believe it was in 66. And then 67, 68, I believe he finished 4th in the Norris Trophy balloting. So, back then, Bobby Orr broke the mold. Back then, you didn't have a lot of offensive defensemen. Bobby Orr was really the first, rushing offensive defenseman. Back then, the Norris Trophy winners went with guys like Neilson, who were tough defensively, stay at home, that can contribute, 5 to 10 goals a year. And like you said, Rob, he had his best offensive year, I guess, in 67, 68 with 10 goals. And 3-time All-Star, 2-time first-team All-Star, and 1-time second-team All-Star. Mike, anything else that stood out to you as far as his style of play or anything about his background?
What I was going to say is there's not a whole lot of tape out on him out there on YouTube and whatnot. Unfortunately, we've talked about before how a lot of that stuff kind of disappeared. So really all you have is the anecdotal evidence and the statistics. And I think what Rob found on Hockey Reference was kind of very indicative of the type of player he was. Probably outstanding passer, positionally outstanding, good hockey sense, was tough enough to clear the crease. I know he wasn't a fighter, but from what I see and given his size, which was pretty big for the time, he might have been kind of like a Ryan Suter type of player. Just perennial, potential Norris candidate. Number one guy, eats up a lot of minutes. He's not a lot of wasted motion, drives offense, even though he's not flashy, has a pretty good shot, and just the type of guy that you want on your blue line, and the type of guy that's, you always hope for when you draft a defenseman in the first round that you'll get. And, with Schneider being, with Neilson being Schneider, the Rangers draft pick's best, favorite player, I hope that we got a guy like him in Schneider. So
yeah, they talk about the first pass, right? They talk about that first pass up to your forwards. That's the term that's used a lot by coaches today. It's the defenseman making that quick first pass out of the zone. And Roger Bear said, the goal of game line, the gag line with Rattel and Hatfield, that Jimmy Neilson, along with Park, of course, but that Jimmy Neilson with that very soft, quick first pass up to the forwards really was instrumental. And just all the points that the gag line was able to score during the late 60s, early 70s. And he had a good shot. He had a good shot from the point, as evidenced by his 10 goals that one year. Typical defenseman back then, score 4, 5, 6, 7 goals, but that one year, even Don Cherry said, for him to score 10 goals back in 67, 68 was very unusual for a defenseman. Rob, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, we talk about it, what makes it so hard to compare eras, right? Because, at first blush, you look at a guy that has, 6 goals, maybe 20 some odd assists. Always, discount it because we're used to seeing top-tier defensemen putting up monster points over the last 15 years. But, yeah, again, I think everybody's hitting it home. It's a shame that, MSG or the Garden doesn't do, or whenever the Garden does open, something for him. Some kind of, at least, bring it back. And do things like this every so often. Just, you don't have to do it now and be done with it. But continually, every, 10 years or so, remember certain guys. Make sure they're, a new group of fans recognizes who they are.
Yeah. Mike, you mentioned about the not a lot of tape. There are on YouTube, they have a lot of tape on the 71, 72 Rangers Bruins Stanley Cup Finals. A lot of good tape on him. And, we did a show, right, on the Rangers Flyers Stanley Cup quarterfinals or semifinals a few weeks ago, or a couple of months ago, excuse me. And that was actually Jimmy Nielsen's last games with the Rangers. He was let go in the draft, interleague draft, right after the Rangers were eliminated by the Flyers in 1973-74. But he played a pretty decent series. If you go look at those tapes, Brad Park had his moments in that series. But defensively, Jimmy Neilson was probably the most solid of 5 Rangers defensemen that rotated in that series, along with Rod Sealing, Ron Harris, Brad Park, Dale Rolfe, and Jim Neilson. He actually, I thought he was the most effective of the Rangers defensemen, but that was his last go-around with the Rangers, and then he was exposed in the draft. And by the way, his nickname, of course, was the Chief with the New York Rangers. So the fans, remember him very dearly. He was a real favorite. Again, very understated, quiet. You didn't get a lot of fanfare. But then, he was let go after his 12th season. I guess back then they had interleague drafts. It wasn't the expansion draft, but I guess every so often the league had interleague drafts where they would expose players. And the California Golden Seals, the Oakland Seals, did select Neilson. He instantly became their captain. And he was teamed up with Hampton, a defenseman with the Oakland Seals, and he became captain. But he did sustain a very serious knee injury where he tore ligaments. And that was kind of the beginning of the end of his career with the Seals. He actually was there 4 years, 2 with Oakland, but then they moved to Cleveland and became the Cleveland Barons when they left Oakland. And he had a year and a half with them. Again, injury really curtailing and affecting his ability to really play the way he wanted to play. And then he finished his career with the World Hockey Association, with the Edmonton Oilers. And he played with Gretzky, a 17-year-old rookie with Edmonton in the WHA to round out his career. Anything else, Rob, that stood out, whether it be with Oakland or with his days with Gretzky at Edmonton or anything else with the Rangers?
No, I really don't have anything else to add. Again, wish it would be easier to see more highlights of these guys. Hopefully the Rangers and lots of the NHL is learning from this. And if guys want to look up guys from this era in 20 years, they'll have the access to it, even though I'm not going to be very optimistic about that. I can see the NHL locking everything down and, putting DRM, and rights issues on everything on YouTube. So, but hey,
Yeah. Well, just one last thing on my end with Neilson. We've referred to the article from Blue Shirt Banter, October 29th of this year, so last month. Kevin Power, again, did a great job. Mike did a very nice job outlining the article, but I urge everyone to look at it. There's one line or two that really struck me. It seems that Kevin Powers was really taken when Schneider, the Rangers' first-round draft pick, mentioned that Jimmy Neilson was his favorite player growing up. And again, this is a kid that was born 22 years after Neilson last played pro hockey. So Kevin Powers took this one step further. He tweeted a poll, and he wanted Ranger fans to respond to this poll via Twitter. And it says, if you're a Ranger fan, do you know who Jim Neilson is? So there was 511 people that chose to vote in the poll. 60% of the Ranger fans said they had no idea who Jim Neilson was. And then they clarified it, and they said, well, they had no idea until they heard about him via the Schneider tweet. So then, he's just wondering, how could this be? How could a team that prides itself so much on their heritage and on their traditions, how can so few fans know about this? So, maybe this will put the a little motivation to the Rangers management that they, like you said, Rob, they need to do a better job. They really need to do a better job doing bringing up older players, because he was saying that younger fans now are going to be more of a diverse lot. There's going to be more diversity with Ranger fans as the years go by, and if you've got a player like Jimmy Neilson, an Aboriginal player, that could really expand their fan base, not only for the Rangers, but throughout the entire league. So I hope, that really stimulates the Rangers to do a lot better job, focusing on their heritage and the players from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Mike, any other thoughts?
Yeah, I think I totally agree. It's a good opportunity, to talk about a player who's, comes from the First Nation, and, that those types of players have been marginalized in the past, and he had a really tough road, not only being from a marginalized community, but also growing up in an orphanage, and becoming one of the centerpieces of those Ranger teams for so long. And yeah, I think it's just a horrible missed opportunity, and just kind of, to be honest, to be frank, kind of bizarre that they haven't taken the opportunity to showcase him, and the fact that so few Ranger fans, even ones that have a interest in Ranger history, know who he is kind of tragic. So I'm glad we're talking about him today.
Yeah, and again, 3 All-Star teams. He actually played in one All-Star game with Bobby Orr, who's Bobby Orr's partner, defensive partner in one of the All-Star games. And I think that was back in the time where the NHL All-Stars used to play the Stanley Cup champion in the All-Star game. It wasn't always East versus West. I think that was right before the expansion, when the Kings and the Blues and the Seals and North Stars came into the league. Back then, the All-Star game was the All-Star team players played against the defending Stanley Cup champions, which was interesting. Yeah, before Bobby Orr revolutionized the game, you had stay-at-home defensemen like Jimmy Neilson, who were the candidates for the Norris Trophy. There was one other player that was Aboriginal player, First Nation player, around the same time, and that was George Armstrong of the Toronto Maple Leafs. He was the captain of the Maple Leafs when they had their multi-Stanley Cup championships. Jim Neilson always spoke very fondly of George Armstrong. And again, another hard-nosed but gentlemanly player, a leader, who captained the Maple Leafs. And then more current, back in the, I guess it would be the late 70s, early 80s, Rob, you're probably aware of this player, Stan Jonathan of the Boston Bruins, who was a great offensive talent and one of the toughest fighters ever to lace them up in the National Hockey League. Rob, do you have any recollection of Stan Jonathan, or Mike, do you have any recollection of him?
I do. I couldn't give you too much about him. I don't know about you, Mike.
No, that's the first time I've heard of him. And, it's definitely going to make me go down the rabbit hole after this on Wikipedia and start reading up on these guys.
A lot of video on Stan Jonathan. He had his shooting percentage is second only to Mario Lemieux. He didn't score a lot of goals. I think he had 28 one year. I think he had several 20-goal seasons. He was one of the toughest, 5'7.5" tall. He laid out Pierre Bouchard, who's about 6'3", 6'4" of the Montreal Canadiens. He was one of the toughest, hard-nosed fighters ever to lace him up. Of course, he played for the Bruins. A great goal scorer. There's a lot of video on him. There's a lot of stuff on him. So it would be interesting to get your perspective on that. Okay, last thoughts, guys. Either on the Rangers, anything about the Rangers' trade prospects, or anything about personnel that you want to touch on before we end?
Well, some of the Rangers prospects are playing in Europe. The European leagues are going strong. So Vitaly Kravtsov is having a great season. Nils Lundqvist is having a great season, which is good to see. So, despite there not being hockey in North America, they are playing abroad, and you can follow that and stay up to date with the Rangers prospects playing there.
Yep. Rob?
Yeah, beat me too. That's all I was going to say. They follow as many prospects. All the hockey we're going to get a while. So enjoy until the World Juniors, at least, come the end of the year.
They also the other thing is they released the reverse retro uniforms. So some of the old logos and designs came back, including the Rangers Liberty jersey, which I think Messier and Graves wore those at the tail end of their career.
Yager.
The most
Gretzky.
iconic one is Yager.
Gretzky.
Yeah, Gretzky wore it. So yeah, I mean the Strocker, Nylander years,
yep.
Those guys wore it. There's some, the guys were past their prime, but there were some good Rangers teams with some all-time greats playing together in those uniforms. So it was brings back an interesting period in Rangers history.
Out of 10, what would you give the Lady Liberty jersey at a level of 10? What would you what number would you give it?
The new one?
Yeah, it's the new old one.
The new design. The new design, I give it a 5 out of 10.
Wow.
It's got the logo, but the rest of it is kind of underwhelming. And
yeah, I agree with that too, because it's not very creative. So it's cool and it's retro because we have this 1990s jersey, but that's all it is. It's just that jersey. Whereas you take other teams, whether it be the Kings or Colorado, Arizona, Minnesota, that just crazy things and mix things up.
Yeah.
The whole idea of reverse retro, I think that those are the jerseys that stand out to me. I mean, the Vancouver jersey, I can't decide if I love it or if I hate it, but it's definitely cool. It's just different. I think, like I said, the Kings in Colorado really just crushed it with theirs. The trivia question is the Red Wings have gone like 60 years without changing their jersey.
Right.
So they unfortunately don't have anything to change to. So
yeah.
They're just wearing. They literally look like they're wearing a practice jersey. It's just white with the logo.
Yeah.
But again, I think the Rangers, and joking that nothing is as bad as the Islanders doing virtually nothing on their jersey. But this is a great marketing move to sell jerseys, get excitement going for hockey. It would be nice to see the Rangers mix things up. Scramble the colors. That's the whole idea of this experiment, right? Is to not have the same jersey. Maybe mix the Liberty jersey with something from the 30s. They've always, something like that. I don't know. Don't come to me for creativity.
Well,
it would have been nice to break the mold. Do something like Buffalo did.
Yeah.
Well, during the mid-'70s, when John Ferguson became the GM of the Rangers for a couple of years, they had their Ranger shield. They had the crest, the Rangers crest, as opposed to Lady Liberty, which I thought was a nice-looking jersey. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it.
Yeah.
They had. I thought that was one they should have brought back. That would have really. That going back to the '90s is good, but going back to the '70s would have been even better. And I think the Rangers crest, they only wore that for about 2 or 3 seasons. And I thought that was a nice one.
Yeah.
That would have been.
I think there was a healthy. Yeah, I was just going to say, I think there's a healthy appetite amongst Rangers fans, kind of my age, that grew up watching.
Right.
Those guys in the Liberty jerseys to bring that back. I think that's where that came from.
There you go again, right? That's the problem.
Yeah.
There we go again. That's
there you go.
That's where the money is. That's who's spending money.
To be fair, I think they did kind of evoke some of the old designs in their recent Winter Classic jerseys.
Absolutely.
And
yes.
and their Sunday jerseys. So, I think they've already done that to an extent. So the opportunity to bring the Liberty jersey back kind of made sense. But some of the designs out there are just, like Rob was saying, teams really kind of went nuts with it. And I think it was there was an opportunity to have a little more fun with it than the Rangers did. You look at the Phoenix ones and the Mighty Ducks ones, they're just off the wall. And then my favorite is the Colorado Avalanche. They have the Avalanche colors, but the Quebec Nordiques uniform and logo.
Yeah, they had great.
I thought that was very cool.
The Nordiques had great uniforms, man. They had some nice they had some nice uniforms back in the day. They really did. Yeah, I guess. I mean, again, if you bring back that Ranger crest, then people of your generation are going to need to drill down further and find out, well, tell me more about that. When did they wear this? And it would just force people to get a little bit more involved in the history of the club. Now that's kind of an opportunity lost, I think. Anyway, no one said.
It's also important. It's also important to recognize, though, that the Rangers don't have a very, I think one of the strongest suits the Rangers have, much like, maybe like the Canadians as well, is they don't have diverse uniform history.
Right.
And I think there's something classic to that as well. When you think about them in Montreal,
and Blackhawks,
Chicago, Detroit.
Yeah.
Even Boston's changed a bunch through the years. They've had maybe the same colors, but they've had changes to it.
Yeah.
Whereas those teams in Toronto as well. So when you have consistency, you just think about other sports. If the baseball was to do something like this, the Yankees and Dodgers wouldn't have anything to do either. They've had essentially the same uniforms forever. Something goes with that. Again, could be worse. They could have just done darker shade of blue like the Islanders.
That's true. That's really true.
Imagine spending $230 on a jersey that's just the same. It's just the same.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think they're actually more expensive than that. I think they're almost like $300 now.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Really?
They are. I haven't bought an authentic jersey in quite a long time, but I genuinely looked at this and I said, I want to buy 20 of these. Like I just like these, like whoever's in marketing is like talking like, good job, give that guy a raise, give that guy, that woman a raise, because they hit a home run with me. I mean, truth be told, in case my wife listens to this, I will not be I won't be spending $6,000 on hockey jerseys.
No, year. I don't think you will, Rob. I don't think that's not in the offering. That's for sure.
No.
Oh, man. Well, guys, the next time we convene, maybe we'll have some good information. I guess what we'll do is December's kind of a crazy month with the holidays. I guess we'll start again in January. Does that sound like a plan?
Works for me.
Sounds good.
All right. So
safe and healthy holidays to everybody.
Absolutely.
That's right. Stay safe.
So, fans, if you have any ideas as to topics that you want Rob and Mike and I to discuss, again, Dennis, thank you so much for sticking with the Gilles Gratton. That was a very entertaining subject to touch on before we hit on the great Jimmy the Chief Neilson. And again, fans, please let us know your ideas and thoughts and suggestions on our website. So for Rob Berger and my son Mike Browning, this is Tom Browning saying thank you for tuning in to the Forgotten Hockey Players of Broadway. See you in January. Thank you for listening. This has been a Go Tommy Boy production.